Because of the anime, Yu-Gi-Oh has been ripe for potential memes ever since its inception. But even disregarding the anime, the Yu-Gi-Oh community has managed to create a variety of fun memes, with some even being so common they even had mainstream appeal. So today we're going to look at some of the 10 most interesting cards that inspired memes both inside and outside of the Yu-Gi-Oh community, where they came from and how they managed to become memes in the first place. And with no monsters left on the field, I summoned Dark Magician to this list and declared number 10. Dark Magician is one of the most iconic and recognizable monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Second only to the game's most iconic monster, the Blue Eyes White Dragon. Because of this, Dark Magician is one of the most well-loved monsters in both the game and anime, and is often used in commercials to attract both newer players and nostalgic older players to get into the game. Which is precisely why in 2017, Konami used this recognizable monster in a commercial for the recently released Duel Links, and showcased the classic duel monster Ace delivering the final blow to Mystic 7's opponent. Which is all well and good, but in the commercial, it seemed like duelists weren't exactly playing by the rules. Because in order to bring out Dark Magician, Mystic 7 just had summoned him on the field with no monsters. The issue there is that Dark Magician is a level 7 monster, and as a result, needs a player to tribute 2 monsters in order to normal summon it out to the field. So unless the duelists were playing an alternative format like Junior Journey, it would be impossible to normal summon out Dark Magician to the field with no monsters, since you need at least 2 monsters to tribute. And this jarring moment led to the phrase, with no monsters left on the field, I summon Dark Magician and declare a direct attack, being immortalized into the Yu-Gi-Oh community. Now, in the game state shown in the commercial, it was technically impossible to summon Dark Magician. But in the actual card game itself, it's actually really easy to summon Dark Magician while there are no monsters in the field. In fact, a lot of modern support is centered around ensuring that you can summon out Dark Magician every single turn without needing to tribute a single monster with the use of Eternal Soul. This card lets you summon out Dark Magician from your hand or graveyard for free each turn, and when paired with Dark Magic Circle, forms a really strong interruptive engine that's capable of banishing your opponent's cards each turn by summoning out your Dark Magician to the field. In fact, these cards are available to the TCG, OCG, Master Duel, and even Duel Links right now. So if you want to relive the dream of 2017 and summon out Dark Magician to the field with no monsters and attack for game, it's actually possible, and even part of Dark Magician's main game plan. You should have been prepared for it at this point. Digging in at number 9 is Mystic Mine, one of the most contentious cards in the game that's had multiple memes inspired because of it. You see, Mystic Mine is an incredibly strong floodgate that locks your opponent out of the game if they control more monsters than you do, because it stops your opponent from activating monster effects or even declaring an attack. It also comes with 2 of its own built-in outs though, because if you control more monsters than your opponent, you're the one locked out by your own Mystic Mine. And if both players control the same amount of monsters during the end phase, Mystic Mine will automatically destroy itself. But if you're struggling to deal with Mystic Mine, an easy solution is to just draw the out. And that goes for any floodgate or boss monster. If your opponent ends on a towers, just draw a kaiju. If they end on a floodgate, just draw Harpy's Feather Duster. And if they end on a board on infinite negates, just draw Dark Ruler and evenly match. The meme was made to highlight how oppressive Yu-Gi-Oh could feel sometimes, because there are some board states which appear impossible to deal with unless you have the exact counter you need in your hand to deal with it. A Mystic Mine was at the forefront of this discussion, because while it was possible to draw spell and trap removal to deal with your opponent's Mystic Mine, if you didn't draw your particular out, you were in for a long and arduous game until you did. And even if you managed to find 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster in your deck, there's a strong chance your opponent has a Field Barrier or Solemn Judgment up to leave you stuck under Mystic Mine permanently. But there are 2 sides to every coin. While a lot of people complained about Mystic Mine, pro players such as Jesse Cotton believe that people had the wrong mindset about Mystic Mine, and instead believe that duelists should ensure that their deck is always equipped to deal with it. And as a result, Jesse tweeted out his infamous words. Okay guys, but with all due respect, how are you not prepared for Mystic Mine at this point? It's a little ridiculous to not have a well thought out plan when entering a tournament. As a result, this caused a lot of players to take Jesse's words and then replace Mystic Mine with any other absurd topic. Because seriously guys, with all due respect, how are you not prepared for 10 Spiritfish Ute at this point? It's a little ridiculous not to have a well thought out plan when watching a TheDuelLogs video. For better or for worse, Mystic Mine was eventually banned at the TCG, meaning that players no longer had to prepare for it, making it so that this meme sort of died out. But drawing the out, at least, is an eternal struggle that will likely continue so long as the game lasts and has at least 1 legal floodgate. Traveling into number 8 is Dante, Traveler of the Burning Abyss, a representative of the Burning Abyss archetype which has multiple memes associated with it, partly because it happens to be the pet deck of one of the biggest Yu-Gi-Oh streamers at YuGiOh, Farfa. The Burning Abyss archetype is composed of monsters that all share an effect to destroy themselves if you control any monster that isn't a Burning Abyss monster, which is why the archetype can sometimes struggle using non-Burning Abyss monsters, because the moment they're on the field, it basically locks you out of being able to summon out your main deck Malebranches. Which is why there's a lot of confusion when certain cards allow for Burning Abyss monsters to exist on the field with other non-BA monsters, causing the opponent to ask why the BA doesn't destroy itself. This can happen a number of different ways, but usually occurs because the Burning Abyss monster was summoned off of Turgon from the Underworld or Libic, both of which negate the effects of the card that they summon, or they're being pointed to by Cherubini, which protects them from being destroyed by card effects, including their own. But as well as their own detrimental effects, the Burning Abyss monsters all have their own unique graveyard effects, which also led to a particular combo becoming very well known and very well memed. By linking off a Dante with a Seer attached to it as a material, you can perform the most infamous Burning Abyss combo. You can activate Seer's graveyard effect as Chainlink 1 in order to target your Dante that you sent to the graveyard to special summon it back to the field. And then as Chainlink 2, you can activate the graveyard effect of Dante to target Seer and add it back to your hand. To put it short, Chainlink 1, Seer target Dante. Chainlink 2, Dante target Seer. This gives you everything you need to fulfill Beatrice's alternative summoning condition, since now you have a Dante monster in the field and a Burning Abyss monster in your hand to discard. Although in the modern era, it's not too likely that you'll be seeing this combo too much, since Burning Abyss is more of a rogue contender than it is a meta deck. But back when it was first released, a lot of people believed Burning Abyss to be strong. Too strong even, and waited for the day that Dante would eventually put on the ban list for his ability to mill cards for cost. And they waited, and waited, but that day never came. So people would often joke that Dante was the hide-and-seek champion of the particular year for being able to dodge the ban list each time and never get hit itself. And given Burning Abyss's current status, it's unlikely that Dante is going to be hit anytime soon, so he has a lot more championship trophies to collect for years to come. And with his ability to dodge lists, this will hopefully explain why this particular BA doesn't die, even if he does get sent to the graveyard a lot. Editor's note, to add on to this a little bit more from my scriptwriter, the reason why the BA no die became a phrase in the YuGiOh community is because of a moment where DZ tried to Ring of Destruction a BA monster being protected by Cherubini, where he says the iconic phrase. And roaring in at number 7 is a card that you might not have read before. Miscellaneousaurus. And just in case you haven't, let's read it together in excruciating detail. Misk is a level 4 fire dinosaur effect monster with 1800 attack and 1000 defense. Its first effect is a quick effect and requires you to send it from your hand to the graveyard for cost, but it can only be used during the main phase. This effect makes it so that all of your dinosaur monsters you control are completely unaffected by your opponent's activated effects until the end of the phase, putting a stop to common hand traps and even protecting them from board breakers during your opponent's turn. Its second effect is a graveyard effect, which lets you banish it and add as many dinosaur monsters as you want to special summon a dinosaur monster from your deck with a level equal to the number of dinosaur monsters you banished, but you have to destroy it during the end phase. And this particular effect is a hard once per turn. So, now if everyone asks you if you've read Misk, you can answer yes. The meme of asking if someone has read Misk originated from Farfa, where he was talking to another player on stream and asked why Dinosaur was so strong, and the player jokingly responded, "Have you read Misk?" to basically say that the card was so absurdly strong that it carried Dinosaur as a strategy. The community loved this clip so much that it became commonplace to lightly poke fun at people for misunderstanding Miscellaneousaurus' effect, which was fairly often because despite Misk only having 2 effects, it's a fairly complicated card with small details that are important to remember. For example, Misk's protection only lasts until the end of the phase, so if your opponent tries to preemptively protect their board of dinosaurs with Misk in hand effect, you can just move on to the next phase to clear away the protection. It is also main phase only, letting you have free reign to interact with your opponent's board during the draw phase, standby, battle, and end phase. And Misk only negates activated effects, so your opponent's monsters are still going to be affected if you flip up a skill drain. The card basically has a lot of small intricacies that can be easy to forget, but it did lead to some funny memes. Especially because, like with the Jesse Cotton tweet, people would often replace Misk with any other card to imply how strong it is, or to poke fun at people for misunderstanding their effects. Have you read Vishuda? But eventually, Konami did end up reading Misk and also agreed that it was an absurd enough card to be limited, so the meme isn't around as much as it used to be since Dino is seen a lot less play. But at least you're now less likely to be caught off guard by this really powerful card. Normal summoning to number 6 is Aleister the Invoker, the star of the Invoke strategy and the deck that's often made fun of for its linear style of play. Aleister has 2 effects. Its first effect is a quick effect which lets you target a fusion monster you control and it lets it gain 1000 attack and defense until the end of the turn. But it's Aleister's second effect which made him into a big meme, because whenever you normal summon Aleister or flip him face up, you can add an invocation from your deck to your hand, the archetypal fusion spell which lets you go into most of your invoked monsters. This effect made the invoked engine quite strong because it meant that you can go into a negate off of just a single card. By normal summoning Aleister, you could search for invocation, then you can link it off Aleister into a Salmagrin Almirage, and then link off Almirage into a Secure Gardna. This gives you a light monster in the field and puts Aleister in your graveyard, so that you can use the effect invocation to banish both Aleister and the Secure Gardna to fuse into invoked Makaba. Then, with the graveyard effect of invocation, you can shuffle it into your deck and add Aleister back to your hand, which gives you a free card to use for invoked Makaba's negate. And because this is a 1-card engine that put a negate on your board, the invoked engine saw a lot of competitive play, both as an engine in decks that didn't need their normal summon, and even as its own deck where it was combined with Dogmatica's engine. But as a result of its commonplace use, a lot of players started to get annoyed by how often they were seeing Aleister the Invoker, and how linear the invoked engine usually was since it was the exact same combo every time. As a result, people would often joke about this repetitive line by repeating with just the phrase normal summon Aleister, which is meant to imply the whole singular card line since virtually every player knew what it did. There were some variations of the meme too. Some players got so tired of the phrase normal summon Aleister that they began to say special summon Aleister instead, which does nothing, but it's absurd enough to be funny. And sometimes players will instead use a different card instead of Aleister, depending on what their main playstarter is, and applying this simple combo from there. The meme has fallen out of favor a bit since the invoked engine hasn't really seen too much recent play. But with how often it was repeated and how many people now know of Aleister's effect, it's definitely become immortalized in the minds of Yu-Gi-Oh community. And firing up to this list number 5 is Salaman Great Sunlight Wolf. Oh, was that the 5th entry? Tributing into number 5 is Nibiru the Primal Being. Nibiru's impact in the game cannot be understated, because ever since its release, it's a hand trap that's always had to be on the minds of duelists when deck building. Because if you summon 5 or more times in one turn, your opponent can activate the effect in Nibiru during the main phase and tribute the entire field, leaving you with only a Primal Being token left on your field, a vanilla token that might have decent stats depending on what was tributed. As a result, Nibiru's presence in the game caused a lot of deck builders to consider finding a way to get some kind of monster negate either before or on their 5th summon, so that if their opponent has Nibiru, they at least have a way of negating it so they can keep their board. But there are plenty of strategies that have no way to reach a negate before the 5th summon occurs, which often results in them being Nibiru, so people often joke and say the most common end board in certain decks is the Primal Being token. The 2 most common victims of this joke are Salaman Great and Hero, both of which can put up impressive end boards if given the chance, since Salad has amazing trap cards and Hero has Dark Law and Plasma, but they often struggle to find a way to play around Nibiru, which results in their whole board basically being countered by a single card and all the resources being pulled into giving the Primal Being token a lot of attack and defense points. This is at least a consolation prize, as some decks, like Plunder Patrol, can actually struggle to deal with the high stats that a Primal Being token can reach. But it's definitely not as good as keeping your usual end board, and the best decks in the game are usually ones that have some way of playing around Nibiru, whether by summoning 4 or fewer times a turn, or by making sure they can have some kind of negate up by the 5th summon. As a result, some decks are so worried about Nibiru, they'll often count how many summons they have occurred in their head just to make sure they're not accidentally playing into it and could cost them the game. Which is why the phrase, "was that your 5th summon," became a statement to be feared. Blowing into number 4 is Mystical Space Typhoon, another one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most iconic cards that has a particularly well-known meme associated with it because of a misunderstanding of how the card works. Which is strange at first glance, because Mystical Space Typhoon's effect is actually quite simple, as all it does is target a spell or trap card in the field and destroy it. But in the past, people were often confused about what the term destroy even meant, and would sometimes use Mystical Space Typhoon in response to a spell or trap card to destroy it in hopes that removing it from the field that its effect would also be negated, resulting in the meme of MST negating. Unfortunately, however, this isn't how Mystical Space Typhoon works, because even if an activated spell is removed from the field or destroyed, its effect will still go through. Because all Mystical Space Typhoon did in this instance is destroy the card itself without actually interacting with the card's effect. So if you activate your Mystical Space Typhoon to destroy your opponent's activated Rite of Artemisir or Welcome Labyrinth, that's usually a mistake and just a -1 in terms of card advantage. But even though this meme usually isn't true, there are some instances where Mystical Space Typhoon basically acts like a negate. Because while it can't really interact with normal spell or trap card effects, Mystical Space Typhoon is incredible against continuous spell and trap effects, field spells, and pendulum monsters acting as spell cards. All of these card types usually need to remain face up on the field in order to actually resolve their effects. So if you chain MST to their activation or effect, they'll usually resolve without effect, which isn't technically a negate, but results in a similar outcome. There's even ways to negate some normal spells with MST, but it heavily depends on the card text. Rage with Eyes of Blue requires you to banish it and all cards from your hand, field, and graveyard face down in order to summon out 3 blue eyes from your deck. But if you use Mystical Space Typhoon on Rage, it becomes a different card in the graveyard, so it can no longer banish itself from the field in order to fulfill its summoning conditions, which means that it can't summon any blue eyes white dragons, and MST causes it to resolve without effect. Even though MST negates does come from a place of misunderstanding how the game works, it's interesting to see that there is some truth behind the meme that you'll be able to understand more as you gain more knowledge of the game. It is, at least, usually a bad idea to interact with normal spells using MST, but you never know when it might save the day. And laying out the paths of destiny at number 3 is actually a card that doesn't exist in the TCG, OCG, Master Duel, Duel Links, or any other format. It only exists in the anime, Dramatic Crossroads. In the anime, Dramatic Crossroads was used by Chaz Princeton in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX duel against Alexis Rhodes, and in a bid to see if she loved him more, he activated Dramatic Crossroads after he took battle damage. Crossroads has 2 effects, but it's up to your opponent to decide which one is activated. The first effect causes your opponent to randomly discard a card from their hand, which is pretty bad for your opponent, but not the end of the world. But the second effect is something that the opponent is likely never to pick, because it lets you look at your opponent's hand and choose a card in it to add to your hand. which means that they go card neutral while you go -1 in terms of card advantage, while the first effect at least means you both go -1. In terms of the meme though, the effect of Dramatic Crossroads isn't too relevant. What is relevant, however, is the card's artwork. Dramatic Crossroads art is actually a really popular meme template outside of the YuGiOh community. It managed to meet meme status all on its own because of how its artwork depicted two crossing paths. In these memes, the shining path is often used to depict a positive thing, the dark path a negative thing, and the boy as someone or something that can go one of two ways, which led to its popularity because it made it very similar to a lot of other popular meme formats and meant that it could be used in similar ways. Dramatic Crossroads is likely to be the second most, if not the most widespread meme on this list, but it's not as high as it could be because it's not based on a real card, and it didn't really take off in YuGiOh circles, just in mainstream meme circles. But the number 2 spot on this list definitely is one of the most popular memes in the YuGiOh community. Drawing in to number 2 is Pot of Greed, which has created one of the most infamous memes in the community, all thanks to the anime. YuGiOh was, and still is, a very complicated game, which sometimes made duels in the anime fairly difficult to keep up with. So in order to make sure the people watching could understand the duel, characters would often clearly announce the card that they were playing alongside a brief explanation of what the card does. But when it came to commonly used cards in the series, their effects were often repeated a lot, and because Pot of Greed was such a common staple, its effect got explained so many times to the point of redundancy. And because of that, people would then begin to jokingly ask and ponder what Pot of Greed actually does, since it was apparently such a complicated card that it had to be explained every single time. So, what does Pot of Greed actually do? Pot of Greed is a normal spell card that lets you draw 2 cards from your deck. It's one of the game's most iconic cards and saw extensive play from its release until it was eventually banned. But because of its use in the anime, Pot of Greed memes have managed to last throughout the game's entire history, becoming a part of YuGiOh's identity as a card game and one of the biggest memes in the community. There is no real modern equivalent of Pot of Greed in terms of widespread memes, but Pot of Desires, at least in the YuGiOh community, comes somewhat close. People often fear Desires drawn into another copy of Desires. This was actually memes on so much that it eventually encouraged people to only play 2 copies of Desires, just because they didn't want to lessen the chances of drawing another copy of it off the original Desires. And because you had to banish 10 cards on top of your deck, people would also meme about it being a -9 in terms of card advantage, because even though you were adding 2 cards to your hand, you lost 10 cards on the top of your deck, which could have potentially banished engine pieces or important what-ofs in your strategy. So if you had a bad banish of Desires, you could say that you went -9. But in terms of mass appeal, only one meme has managed to surpass Pot of Greed, and has become popular both in the YuGiOh community and mainstream circles alike. And obliterating to the number 1 spot is Exodia The Forbidden One and all of its associated pieces. In terms of the YuGiOh anime, no moment will ever be as iconic as Yugi managing to assemble the 5 pieces of Exodia to defeat Kaiba. It was many people's first introduction to Yu-Gi-Oh, and that moment made them want to play the game. It's why Exodia has become such a fan-favorite archetype, and why many players, even in the modern day, will attempt this unique alternative win condition for the chance of being able to relive the anime. And because of how well-loved it is, this iconic anime moment has been used both in the Yu-Gi-Oh and mainstream community in different memes. Yugi's Mind Crush moment was heavily popularized in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Bridge series, while Exodia Obliterate is a catchphrase that duelists will often use when they manage to succeed in assembling the 5 pieces. Sometimes, a perfect-handed Yu-Gi-Oh! Is often described as drawing Exodia, even if it's not exactly the 5 pieces of Exodia. And there are even several different meme edits which show Exodia being replaced by some other powerful being with the use of custom cards. But probably the most popular modern meme based off Exodia is this one, with Kaiba showing off his blue eyes and Yugi showing the head of Exodia to leave Kaiba in shock. The meme is often used as a template, both by the Yu-Gi-Oh community and the mainstream meme community, to showcase having the direct counter to someone's card or argument, and leaving them in shambles, and meshes well with a lot of other popular meme formats. But even though Exodia is very memeable, there have actually been a few times in the game's history where it was one of, if not the best deck that could be played. For example, when Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest were first released, their effect stated that as soon as they hit the graveyard, you got to trigger their particular search effect, which meant that at the time, you could search easily all 5 pieces of Exodia in one turn by drawing and discarding Sangan and Witch with the effect of Graceful Charity, as well as a huge deep draw engine. Sangan and Witch were eventually eroded, however, to need to be sent from the field to the graveyard, which made this strategy a bit less effective, especially after Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity were banned. But Exodia also managed to reach the top 8 in the 2012 World event, where it relied on the new draw engine focusing on Hope for Escape and Upstart Goblin, as well as a few cards like Wabaku to stall out until they managed to assemble each of the 5 pieces. But whether or not Exodia is good or a bad strategy in any particular time, it's always going to remain in people's hearts as one of the big reasons that they got into Yu-Gi-Oh! Which is probably why this moment in the anime has been memed so often. It's iconic, it's cool, and reminds people of their childhood memories of the game, which is why Exodia is the #1 meme in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, and why it will probably never be overshadowed. Editor's note: to add on to this, in other card games, if they have strategies that rely on them winning in one turn with a combo that is basically an alternative win condition, It's usually referred to as an Exodia deck, like Exodia Mage in Hearthstone, that would use the card Time Warp to take an extra turn, and use that extra turn to win the game if they assemble the right pieces in their hand for their combo. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any of the memes we may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.